Now I can say good morning to everybody. I'm still Jack Klieger, President and CEO of the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust, and I am particularly glad that we have such a beautiful day. And I want to welcome you all as we install a special artifact of our groundbreaking exhibit, Auschwitz Not So Long Ago and Not Far Away. At Auschwitz, 1 million Jewish people were murdered. Crammed freight cars, such as the one outside, were used by the Nazis to deport people within occupied Europe to forced labor camps and death camps during the Holocaust, while much of the world remained silent. It is our intention that this exhibit will prompt all who visit it to take a firm stand against ethnic violence, religious intolerance, and nationalist brutality of all sorts. The response to the Auschwitz exhibit has been significant. Almost 100,000 people have visited the exhibition since it opened in May, and that includes over 12,000 school children. The New York Times chose to call it one of the most high-profile attempts to educate and immerse young people for whom the Holocaust is a fading and ill-understood slice of history. We're honored today to have a number of speakers to talk about how this incredible artifact has come to be here. I did a little math yesterday and found that its travels between Poland and Israel and now New York have covered over 8,000 miles, which is an amazing story. We are honored to have scholars, members of the religious community, people who have curated the exhibit. And before we introduce them, I do want to thank the staff here at the museum who have worked so hard to effect and coordinate this effort. It's been a labor of commitment and passion for all of our staff, and they've really pulled together well. I do want to salute particularly Maggie Rad, head of our exhibitions department, who has aged a lot since this process started, and Lisa Safier of our communications department, who has coordinated this very well. We will introduce a number of speakers, but today we add a very powerful artifact to the exhibition. And beyond thanking everyone in this effort, I want to particularly thank Judith Schwartz for this story of immense courage and the spiritual bravery of her father, who carried this artifact with him on the death march out of Auschwitz, and who kept this artifact safe for so many decades. But before doing that, I would like to introduce Mr. Bruce Ratner, Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. Bruce?
Good morning. As chair of the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust, I want to thank you all for being here today for this very important moment, the presentation of a very special artifact, an artifact that will be part of the exhibition, Auschwitz, Not Long Ago, Not Far Away. We host this exhibition in a museum that completes the historic landscape of the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island. Millions of immigrants, like my father, came to this New York harbor seeking refuge. But also, millions had a very different fate. Murdered in concentration camps like Auschwitz, or murdered by bullets throughout Europe, we force ourselves to confront these human tragedies. They were not long ago, and they were not far away. Today, we gather to again remember and to recognize that those murdered not only resisted by rising up, as in the Warsaw Ghetto, and in the forests, and the camps, but they resisted spiritually through adhering to our traditions. At great danger, 75 years ago, almost to this very day, inmates at Auschwitz sounded this sacred shofar. The shofar represented sacrifice and a call to assemble. For all of us, let the story of this shofar be a call to resist the inclination to be a bystander, to speak out against intolerance and hate, and to work together to overcome the unspeakable inhumanity that pervades so much of the world. We at this museum will continue to be bolder in our mission to educate and to remember, not only by telling the story of Auschwitz, but by telling to all who will listen the history of that very dark period, the Holocaust. This is our commitment, and this is our responsibility. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, staff. Thank you so many fellow trustees that I'm so lucky to be a board chairman of this wonderful museum. And with that, we will now hear remarks from Luis Ferraro, the inspiration, creator of the exhibit, and director of Musealia. Luis, thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruce, for such a kind introduction. For me, the story of creating the exhibition has always been a story of gratitude. And in this case, just when I was sitting here, I was remembering a story that happened many years ago when we started Musealia as a very small family company, and we had a small exhibition in San Sebastian. And my parents had been engaged in helping the daughters and sons of fishermen who had died. And suddenly I was actually in the exhibition, and this was almost 20 years ago, and I was in the ticket box actually, and this old beautiful lady came by, and the exhibit was in the outskirts of the city, and I just noticed that she was probably also from one of these neighborhoods of fishermen, and she came to the ticket box and she just wanted to buy a ticket. So I sold her the ticket, and then she suddenly gave the money and walked back out of the exhibition. So I told her, "Ma'am, please just wait. You have to go the other way around. We have to give you the auditor, and then the exhibition starts." And she basically said that she was not interested in seeing the exhibition, but she was one of those persons whom my parents had helped 20 years ago, and she was just coming back as an act of gratitude. She didn't know who I was. She didn't ask for my parents, but she just wanted to give back. And for me, the story of creating the exhibition is a story of gratitude for all the people that have participated, that have helped, that have created the exhibition, as the curators, as the hosting museums that now welcome the exhibit. And one may think, of course, that traveling exhibitions is a one-way street, because we come, we tell a story, and we leave. But it's actually a two-way street. There's a lot of visitors that come to us, that come with stories and sometimes with artifacts. Two of our curators here and friends and those who created all of this knowledge that you see in the exhibit knew Judith, Professor Judith, who again, in an invention through Michael Birnbaum and Dr. Jan van Pelt, and she was kind enough to accept the request of Robert to display, and she trusted us, she trusted the exhibition, she trusted the team. So again, for me, this is an endless story of gratitude. And I just hope that, of course, how important sound is in our lives. And we have the testimonies, we have the voices, but very few artifacts can actually give us the sound of memory. And this is, and you will now explain it, and Robert and Michael will talk about it. So we will learn about how important it is, this sound and the sound of memory. So Judith, I would like very much to invite you to come and unveil the artifact. And again, thank you so very much on behalf of Musealia, on behalf of everybody. And thank you, everybody, for making the exhibition here in New York so important for so many people. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody who came here today. Friends, family, people who knew my father, or rather our father, as my brother and sister are here today with me, people who knew of our father. Thank you all very much. I'd like to spend the next few minutes telling you a bit about our father, Haskell Tidor. Haskell Tidor was a man of great modesty, I remember as a little girl him saying to me over and over, quoting from Ethics of the Fathers, Pirkei Avot, Me'od, me'od hevei shval ruach. Be very, very humble. And he always used to say, our sages use the word very twice as an emphasis. Remember how important it is to be humble. If he were here today, he would look around and he would look at me and say, Mama, why are you talking about me? Why would anybody want to know about me? But I would say to him, Daddy, I'm not just talking about you, I'm talking about the chauffeur. And then, you have to know, he was like my height, 5'2", a little bit round. He would sit back in his chair and say, the chauffeur, that you can talk about. That's already a different story. Because that leads into something else that Chaskel Tidor was. He was a man of great belief. He was a very devout man. And he had many professions in his life. Before the war, he was a pre-med student, and he was a metallurgist, and he owned a factory. And after the war, he was a bookkeeper, he was a travel agent, he was even a manager of uranium mines in the Wild West for a while. And in between, he was a prisoner in Auschwitz, where he received the number 68715 in giant numerals. He always used to say to me, only towards the end of the war did the Nazis say, be sparing on ink, we don't have enough. With him, he already, big number. None of those were his identity. If somebody would have asked him who he was, he would have said, me, I'm a simple God-fearing Jew. God-fearing he was, simple he wasn't. Chaskel Tidor was a man of tremendous courage. Because of a position that he found himself in Auschwitz, first as block secretary and afterwards as work dispatcher, he had the unique opportunity of saving lives, time after time. Every time, of course, risking his own life to do so. He would switch the names of the living and the dead so that if someone were injured, they could remain in the barracks and as if someone dead had gone out to work that day. Doing something like that, had he been caught, that it would have been his end. And he saved not one, not two, not dozens, not hundreds, more people than I can even imagine. He never talked about it. Only after his death did I hear about this from his friends. But he not only had physical courage, he had spiritual courage. And one of the things that he tried to do as much as possible, being a devout Jew himself, was to switch names of work brigades for the holidays. For example, for Rosh Hashanah, for Yom Kippur, to send religious Jews as far away as he could in commandos, far away from the center of the camp, where there would be less supervision and there might be a chance for them to gather together in a minyan for a little while to be able to pray. He himself didn't have that opportunity. Being worst dispatcher, he had to stay on duty, otherwise the whole thing would have been caught. And that leads us into the story of the chauffeur. One of these groups, a good friend of his, came back and said, Chaskel, there was a chauffeur. Somebody blew a chauffeur. And my father asked, whom? And they told him. And he went to this person, and this person denied it. When I interviewed our father a few years before his death, he said that man must have been very, very frightened. Again, very, very incredibly. But that chauffeur ended up, obviously, where it was supposed to be, because at the beginning of the Dutch March, somebody came up to our father, handed him a package wrapped in rags, and it was the chauffeur, and said, I'm not going to survive this. Maybe you will. Take this chauffeur out. Bring it to the world. Tell them we had a chauffeur here in Auschwitz. And that chauffeur stayed with him throughout the death march to Gleiwitz and on the train to Buchenwald. And for 3 months, he kept it hidden in Buchenwald. And he took it with him after the war to Kibbutz Buchenwald, which he founded, the first post-war kibbutz in liberated Germany. And he brought the first group of young children, teenage survivors, to pre-state Israel in September 1945, which was the first time that he personally blew the shofar on the boat on the way to Israel. When I was a child, I used to ask my father, Daddy, how did you survive? And I didn't know that much about Holocaust. I mean, I wasn't born the head of a Holocaust Institute. And he always used to say to me, I don't know, it was mazel, it was luck. Very often he would say to me, it was b'chazdei Hashem, by the grace of God. But he also used to use the term goral. It was my goral. We should all daven, he would say, we should all pray for a good goral. Now, the word goral in Hebrew has two meanings. One is fate, determined from without. The other is destiny, something that we shape with our own hands. My father's goral was obviously to survive Auschwitz. The chauffeur's goral was to get into the right hands so that he could take it out and it could be here today. And maybe our goral, all of ours, is that we should be here today to honor the memory of a diminutive giant of a man and remember the incredible story of a chauffeur whose cry pierced the darkness of Auschwitz on Rosh Hashanah, 1944, 75 years ago this week. Thank you. I now have the honor and the privilege of inviting the man because of whom the chauffeur is here, Professor Robert Jan van Pelt, the world's foremost historian in terms of the history of Auschwitz and a very incredible person. Robert, please.
Thank you. Yeah, what can you say after that? I was asked to say something about the place of the Shofar in this exhibition. Now, I would like you to imagine for a moment a time before Facebook and a time before Instagram. That is, the time that there still existed something of a private sphere and a public sphere, and that the private and the public sphere were kind of separated, that there were certain things we would do at home, we wouldn't do it outside of the house. We certainly wouldn't text about it. And typically, when we are in a museum, when we represent history in a museum, then that mostly deals with stuff that happens in the public sphere. Museums were created by kings and governments in order to give a record of what happened in the public sphere. However, in the case of Holocaust museums, this is a little different. As you know, when you are a very private person and you live your life and you are walking on the street and a crime happens in front of you and you become a witness, then you cease to be a private person. The state can force you to bear witness in a courtroom. And many people feel very uncomfortable about that because it's dangerous, especially when you've seen the murder of somebody who was a member of the mob by another mobster. You are in a situation of personal danger. A witness is a person who in some way has lost the privilege of being a private person and is burdened with a public duty to act in the public sphere. So the witnesses of the Holocaust, the survivor witnesses, when they started to testify, especially after the Eichmann trial, all became public persons. And the Holocaust museums that started to be created in the 1980s and 90s, in their collections, had of course many artifacts that they got from these witnesses. But these artifacts all acquired a public significance because they were testimony. They were evidence. It was as if all of these artifacts and stories, testimonies, are spoken in a courtroom, the courtroom of history. So when we created this exhibition, when we curated this exhibition, our team, Michael Birnbaum, myself, Paul Sammons, Miriam Greenbaum, Jamel Zaniti, we were very conscious of the fact that what seemed to be all kinds of tiny little personal items are in fact very important public statements. That they are here presented in the court of history. And so then suddenly we have to ask ourselves, what happens when an artifact shows up, being brought from Israel, that is actually a public artifact by its very nature? A shofar, there's nothing private about a shofar. A shofar is there to be blown, to rally, in ancient times, the warriors, to rally the people of Israel, to rally the angels, the heavens. And so when you come in an exhibition in which all the private artifacts have become public, and you bring then a shofar that was blown in Auschwitz into that exhibition, it means really that all the rules break down, they crumble, that the whole idea of what's public and private has disappeared. So I have to say that this Shofar today, in some way, radically changes the exhibition, and that right now I don't really have words for it to express what it means in this exhibition. Thank you. Michael Birnbaum.
The great Swiss historian Werner Rings said that there were three forms of resistance throughout German-occupied Europe that preceded armed resistance. The first he called symbolic resistance. The second he called polemical resistance. Polemical resistance could be the publication of a newspaper. It could be a speech. It could be writing a diary. It could be even humor. The third he called self-help. This shofar is a paramount example of symbolic resistance. It's a shofar that was blown in Auschwitz precisely because it was forbidden to blow a shofar in Auschwitz. It was an act of defiance which stirs the soul and affirms human dignity. How did it arrive in the year 5705 on Rosh Hashanah in Bunamanowitz? Jews who were deported had to put their life in a suitcase. Religious Jews naturally brought a talit and a tefillin. They naturally brought a prayer book. On the eve of Passover, some would bring a matzah. Mothers would always take diapers and foods, and everybody brought photographs, which were the marks of a life. People brought with them mundane items, toothbrushes and hairbrushes, nail clippers and razors, all the things that I brought this morning on my plane from Los Angeles. Someone brought a shofar. Perhaps a family heirloom, perhaps something they did not want to leave behind. When they arrived in Auschwitz, they had to leave everything on the ramp. And if you look at the pictures of Auschwitz that you'll see in the exhibition, you'll see piles and piles of lives that are left on the ramp. When they left it on the ramp, they then faced selection. They may be sent to life or to death. And then the material that they brought with them was taken to a place that was euphemistically called Canada because of the abundance of it all. In the days before Rosh Hashanah, someone smuggled out of Canada a shofar. And someone brought a shofar from Canada, which is in what Auschwitz II, in Birkenau. They brought it to Bunamanowitz. And they brought it in a very deep way because they understood that putting the shofar in the hands of these Jews who were anguished was giving them an opportunity not only to observe a religious commandment, but to observe the ultimate act of defiance. What is a shofar? It's reminiscent of the Akedah, what the Bible calls the test of Abraham, what Jewish tradition calls the binding of Isaac. The Bible looks at the Torah looks at the Father. Jewish tradition looks at the Son. The task of the shofar is to pierce the heavens and to evoke divine mercy. The shofar is blown on Rosh Hashanah with 100 blasts, and the blasts have a unique character to them. The blasts begin whole, and then they are broken, and finally they are shattered. But we never conclude with the shattering, we conclude with a blast that brings them back whole again, and brings it back whole again and strengthened, the Tkiyah Gdolah. Wholeness that is restored, wholeness that is elongated. On Yom Kippur, the last blast is the lone blast, is followed by the great words, next year in Jerusalem, the eternal hope of the Jewish people, the moment that ends the fast, the moment that ushers in a different year. Imagine for a moment not the artifact, but imagine the people who heard the shofar being blown. For the religious Jews, this was fulfilling God's commandment, a sacred act, even in the most anti-sacred place in the history of the world. But even for the most secular, for the most unbelieving of Jews, this was an act of pure and absolute defiance, a way of saying that you will not shape us, we will preserve something of ourselves. Even in this place where everything has been taken away, where no reason prevails, where everything has been lost, where home is no longer, where family is no longer, where parents are dead, where siblings are taken away, where children have been sent to their death, where one lacks all possessions, where one lacks all freedoms, except for the freedom to affirm the human spirit, for the freedom not to consent, not to give in. Your father, Judy, came into possession of this shofar because of an anonymous victim whose name we will never know. He was on the death march. The death march was a march in the dead of winter, where the survivors, everybody had to go beyond human endurance to reach the end of the road and to find if they had enough energy to push through one more moment. In the waning moments of his life, he understood that he was in possession of something precious, something that could bear witness to human dignity, something that could testify to religious integrity, something that could give voice to spiritual defiance in a near complete destruction of those values. And he understood that this could not end with him. This artifact had to bear witness. And look what he did. He gave it to your father, and your father then blew it for the first time when Jews were not going to their death, but Jews were going to rebuild a new life. When Jews could say, not next year in Jerusalem, but as one of the Seder plates that we have in the exhibition, which is the ugliest Seder plate ever seen, but the most magnificent because it says, L'shana hazot b'Yerushalayim, this year in Jerusalem. And on the back it says, Totzeret Sherita Pleta Begalut Germania, the product of the remnant that survived in exile in Germany. So this shofar was called upon to bear witness to the faint, the difficult, the unimaginable hope that the mercies of heaven could be invoked, that there could be a next year in Jerusalem. Where was God in Auschwitz? You'll forgive me in the presence of rabbis to say God was in that affirmation.
Well, thank you to all our speakers, and thank you to Judith Schwartz. And now I'd like to ask from the Fifth Avenue Synagogue, Cantor Joseph Malovany and Rabbi Eli Babich to please come up and blow the shofar.
You may be seated, ladies and gentlemen. So my name is Cantor Joseph Malovany, and my partner is Rabbi Eli Babich. We work together at the Fifth Avenue Synagogue. Two very short comments. I'm sorry I'm crying, but I cannot help it. When I look downstairs and I see that part of the train, I wonder whether my grandmother, who came from Siget, the same town where Elie Wiesel came from, and two uncles, and who knows how many of the 56 members of my family maybe they were on this truck or not. I'm not sure, I don't know, but it drives me crazy each time I come down here to see the exhibition. And therefore the sound of the shofar means a lot, and it's coming soon. I think that every school, every institution, every synagogue should send their members, their students here to see the Auschwitz exhibition. It is for the first time in my life, and I've been reciting, chanting the memorial prayer for the Holocaust under the auspices of this museum. I think it's going to be now 40 years here in New York. But it is for the first time that I earlier on held the shofar in my hand, the shofar from Auschwitz, and chanting the Kel Maleh Rachamim, the memorial prayer for the Shoah, for the Holocaust. This was the first time in my life to hold this. I don't even call it an artifact. This is something that is alive. It sounds outstanding. You heard an outstanding blowing of the shofar from the rabbi. It's the first time. I don't know when it will happen again, but I want to thank the museum for inviting me, and if I may, on behalf of my rabbi, to participate. To me, it's extremely meaningful, and my day is different today to other days. Thank you very much. They get me to work here, it's okay. I will chant the memorial prayer, and maybe I'll put myself at least near the shofar. Can it be taken out? Yes. May I? Yeah. So it will be twice in one day. Kindly rise. Eile male rachamim, shocheine b'meromim, המצאי מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מאירים ומזהירים לנשמות 6 מיליוני אחינו ואחיותינו אנשים, נשים וטף שנהרגו ושנשחטו ושנשרפו ושנחנקו ושנטבחו חיים בארצות אשר נגעה בהם יד הצורר הגרמני הנאצי ועוזריהם יימח שמם וזכרם. בגן עדן תהיה מנוחתם לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בססר כנפיו לעולמים בצרור החיים אס נשמותיהם אדוני נחלתם וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם ונאמר אמן.
I'm going to say something first. We will now thank you all, to all of our speakers, to Professor Schwartz, Professor Birnbaum, Robert Jan, Luis, Bruce, and to Cantor Malovany, and Rabbi Babich. We will now have the chauffeur taken down by our exhibitions team into the exhibit, where it'll be placed into the exhibit. It'll take about 30 minutes. And in the meantime, we will have some of the press here, and I would hope that they will interview any of the people here who participated in the program today, as well as anyone from the museum who you'd like to speak to. And then I invite everybody here, if you'd like, in the next 20 to 30 minutes, if you give a little time, you can come see the exhibit either through an audio tour, which we will give you, or with a gallery educator. You just have to give us about 30 minutes to take the Shofar and bring it into the collection. So let me just say thank you to all of you for coming. It is indeed an honor to be able to do this wonderful deed, particularly 75 years since the Rosh Hashanah when this was blown. And thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.